While working together on filming a documentary in the wilds of California on October 20th, 1967, Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin happened upon the subject of their film when they encountered a large bipedal humanoid ape, commonly known as Bigfoot. Their initial surprise at finding their quarry and the fact that it spooked their horses made it difficult to bring out the cameras to film, but Gimlin was eventually able to calm his horse down and retrieve his equipment, allowing him to film the creature in motion. The beast noticed their presence and turned to look upon them with a countenance that would later be referred to as one of contempt, and then walked away at a brisk pace from the two filmmakers. They pursued the creature, losing it temporarily to the woods once, only to regain line of sight that was quickly lost again, which ended their encounter. The duo attempted to search for the beast, but their tracking failed them, although they were able to find several tracks that they were able to make plaster casts of, made by the enigmatic figure, eventually bringing the evidence back to the rest of the world, creating a media frenzy that helped popularize the word Bigfoot and encourage discourse on whether or not the entity was real or hoaxed. Here we have what is perhaps the most well known documented encounter with the entity known as Bigfoot that we will be discussing today on Friday Night Frights. I'm your host, Christian Ashley of Systematic Geekology, here to terrify and instruct you all on the weird, unusual, fascinating, fantastical, and unexplainable things that may or may not lurk out there in the world. Now, just as a reminder for everyone, this is the first of the Friday Night Frights video that you, the audience, have selected. If you're wondering, well, no, I never selected this. Well, you should join the Priest to the Geeks page on Facebook. I try to do at least as soon as possible, give the opportunity to have people vote and give them a large list to choose from. I believe for this one, we had about 10 items to choose from, and Bigfoot won out narrowly over, I want to say it was the Abominable Snowman. So would have been a very close topic too there. So guys, if you really want to know, uh, excuse me, if you really want me to know what you want me to do, head over to Facebook, join the Priest of the Geeks page, and then next time this vote happens, be around because we will let everyone know. So, for everyone, if you're new here, our setup will be to go once a month covering 6 categories. Being that this is the beginning of the year, we start from the very beginning. That is cryptozoology, which is our topic of discussion tonight with Bigfoot. Then we go to the paranormal. We have religious strangeness, the weird and the unexplained, true crime, and ufology. So we've been through one whole round of all that. So this is our second episode for cryptozoology. And what better way to do it from the Loch Ness Monster, probably to the next most popular creature on the list? We go to Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, or the skunk ape, or skookum, and plenty more names. This creature has been imagined and speculated as a large hominid that has been seen by thousands upon thousands of eyewitnesses, not all of whom agree with its basic characteristics. Could this be results of a hoax, or people just trying to get a good story out there and make people believe them, so they just make stuff up on a spot? Could there be different subspecies of this? If this does indeed exist in some way, shape, or form, could there be different types of this beyond the regular Bigfoot, whatever their scientific name would be? Who knows? That's the fun. That's why we're exploring all this. So as far as like collecting a grand notice of characteristics for it, I put a couple bullet points down to say most of the time this is what you're going to see, and there's some outliers for everything else. But you know, some say horns. You know, uh, other people imagine it to yeah. It gets wild and crazy of it's able to teleport and turn invisible or stuff like that. But I'm trying to keep to like in within nature that we're aware of what could possibly be aspects of this creature if it did indeed exist. So for Bigfoot himself, it is said to grow to be somewhere between 6 and 15 feet tall, with the smaller ones typically being described as juvenile versions of the taller variants. Some hunters and eyewitnesses claim it also has a very human like face, which is the primary reason why some of them have never shot the creature when the opportunity presented itself. And as some skeptics would say, that provides a very Convenient means of, oh, I totally saw it and I had the opportunity to shoot it, but I didn't. But there are other people say it invokes a bit of empathy within them, in the same way some may look upon a chimpanzee or gorilla and say, "No, I couldn't shoot that. It looks too close to a human being." So it really depends on who you believe in all this. Now, it is covered normally with fur that ranges in color from black, brown, silver, and dark red hair. Those are typically the ones you're going to see if someone is talking about it. Sometimes white, I should add that. And as seen as the Patterson Gimlin film, it also appears this fur to even cover the breasts of the female members of the species. I'm not saying that for the sake of saying that word, but in the fact that a lot of scholars, primatologists that studying primates, people who study primates, put it that way. I forgot to write that down. That's on me. Would say that, hey, this isn't what happens with ape species that we have here, and others would say it's still possible. So I do this to let you all know something that is brought up as an accusation against this actual one caught in the Patterson Gimlin film. Is it someone in a suit? Is it someone who imagined it? Is it actually a creature? So trying to give you all the points there. Now, continuing with our description of kind of the characteristics as a whole of the species, should one exist, it is often said to have odd vocalizations in making hoots, hollers, grunts, and the like that could be interpreted as its own language, according to some. Some people do believe that Bigfoot is sapient. It is capable of speech in the same way that you and I are. Others believe that this is like, a primitive, more primate language, in that extent that, gorillas are able to talk to one another, but it's not in the same way that you and I would talk to another, and they're not as aware of themselves as we are. They're not able to reason in the same way we are. So there's a lot of debate there. And of course, a lot of debate on a creature that we don't know for sure if it actually exists. So most eyewitnesses, when they have gotten closer to the beast, oftentimes, the vast majority of the time, describe the smell as being overwhelming and nauseous, like leading to such names as the skunk ape to describe the horrendous smells. Now, skunk ape is more like the Floridian variant of Bigfoot, but that name has since then. The first time I ever remember seeing it was like in the early 90s or 2000s, I think. But I think it's since passed on to as another name for Bigfoot across the United States and Canada and Mexico, even. Now, its eyes are said to be able to glow in the dark, typically described as being yellow, orange, or red in color. But as in park against this, as far as science is concerned right now, as far as we are aware in the world, there's no evidence that apes, monkeys, or humans have the eye shine that most would associate with animals like owls. If you're out in the woods and your flashlight and there's some eyes looking back at you, that eye shine there is typically found in some animals, but not in all animals. And primates would be an example of one that is not found in. But that does not mean it's impossible, but it is a mark against it if the species typically, the group is going to be close enough to itself. So that's another reason why I bring that up. But perhaps Bigfoot's most prominent feature is what it is named after, its large feet, which make human feet look incredibly small in comparison. And plaster casts made of alleged tracks range in size from 15 to 24 inches long, as compared to humans who, at the largest recorded range that I saw, only managed to get to 18.5 inches long. And that is a clear outlier for the normal foot size of humanity, so it's much, much smaller than that. But that's as far as we have recorded, as far as we can go when it comes to the size of our feet. As well, Bigfoot is said to be an omnivore and has been seen eating plants, fruit, and insects, as well as eating deer or any other animal it's caught. And there are even some reports that it has taken beloved pets for sustenance, so dogs, cats, stuff like that. So it seems to be an opportunistic hunter in that regard, a forager. So where is Bigfoot said to live? Well, Bigfoot's range is pretty much as large as this creature is, covering from the frigid wilds of northern Canada, uh, all the way, even Alaska, all the way to Panama. Although South American wild men and apes have also been reported. And the most famous one I can think of would be Deloy's ape, an alleged ape that some people believe is just a spider monkey that was caught in a way that made it appear as if it was a giant ape. Other people believe the photos that we see there, it's an actual ape-like species that exist in South America. As far as we are aware, no apes in that area, but the possibility remains. So I say this, Bigfoot typically is going to be. Most people would even just narrow it down to Canada and the United States, but there are several reports of ape-like species that are very close to humans in appearance that exist in Central America, Mexico as well. So I didn't want to disregard them in all of this. Like as much as there's only so much we can do with this, and to save the sound of my own voice, to save me from like losing my breath from just talking continually. I did narrow down a lot of what we're talking about tonight because Bigfoot, imagine that with thousands upon thousands of people seeing it, has a lot of recorded sightings that if I went through every single one of them, I could be here the whole time. Now it'd be a different story if I was making some money off of this, but for the sake of this right here, we're going to get to kind of some of the heavy hitters, as it were. So, with all that said, like, what is Bigfoot exactly? Like, uh, let us ask a handful of the eyewitnesses that have lived to tell their tales if those eyewitnesses can indeed be trusted at all. And we're going to start with one of the more popular ones outside of. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's do the Patterson Gimlin film. Is at this point, there's a lot of. If this is real, if they indeed took film that many people have seen that's been parodied. Like the first time I remember it being parodied was watching Elf back in the day with Will Ferrell, like taking the pose in that picture you see right there. Like if this is indeed a giant hominid that exists somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, that is astounding because this is some really great footage if that is true. Now, Patterson and Gimlin, like I said earlier, their purpose was to make a documentary about Bigfoot. So if you're someone who doesn't believe in coincidence, and I don't believe in coincidence, it kind of makes you question some things of going, So you went out to do this and you caught what you were looking for, as opposed to like, hey, we know for sure, like I'm making a documentary on flounders or whatever, or, the spider monkeys. And I know spider monkeys live here. I know flounders live here in the ocean. Well, I can plan for that. And my goal is to find them and I know where they are. That's different than I'm trying to find something and then look for it, but I don't know where it is and I just happened upon it. But it could very well be just that serendipity. Once again, like I don't believe in coincidence. I do believe that things come into being, and that is part of it. Is that even though they were looking for it, it just happened to work. As they were doing so, they went to the right location. If this is indeed not someone in a suit. And there are many claims against that, and we'll get to that later on. But one of the focuses of the documentary that we're going to make was a story known as Ape Canyon, the Ape Canyon incident, so called because of the story that happens here. It was not, as far as I'm aware, this area was not called Ape Canyon before this, but it was reported in the 20s. And they were making this pseudo documentary to the point of pretending like they were being involved in this, and they were like interviewing the actual people there. And that's when they happened upon Bigfoot as they were traveling around, in this area, and just happened to see what appears to be a female members of the species. So is that true? Is it not? There are plenty of people who've casted doubt on it before, who said that it's just a person in a suit. Other people say, well, look at that. That's not how a human walks. And then other people complain about the frame rate here, which is something I actually learned about as I was doing my research. I'd never actually seen anyone talk about this before. This is I'm trying to remember. This is like either 16 or 18 frames per second. And normally when they were filming, it would have been like, in the 20s or 30s or something like that. I'd have to look it up again. And they brought that against them. And, the counter being is like, hey, we were rushed. We weren't like prepared for this. It was a heat of the moment thing. So we didn't really get to say, hey, make sure that's on, 30, blah, blah, blah frames per second. That'll make it look a lot better. So we're stuck with what we have. So who do you believe? Who do you not believe? We'll get to that when we get to our what could Bigfoot actually be section. But going back to Ape Canyon, like I said, this is close to Mount St. Helens. in the region known as Ape Canyon, so named because of the incident recorded in 1924, when a group of miners were attacked by several massive ape like entities that pelted their cabin with rocks. This is a bonkers story. It is a terrifying story. It is one I most definitely would not like to have been involved in. Given the chance, no way, Jose. It's not for me. But to tell the story as accurately as possible, in Washington state, Fred Beck, alongside his fellow miners, encountered a 7-foot tall bipedal ape while gathering water from a spring and, scared of what it could do, one of his fellow miners named Hank fired 3 shots in its direction to deter it from approaching them, causing the creature to flee. And yes. Oh, before I go any further, like I love this artwork here. I tried to look up who was responsible for it, and I came up with nothing. Admittedly, I'm not like perfect in this regard, but if you know who drew this, please let me know so I can change my sources and let people know where this came from because art like this deserves to be seen. But this is kind of an artist rendering of the actual incident there. So they then the miners returned to their cabin to explain their story to their fellow miners who were already there. But as it was growing late, they were afraid to leave in the night to get away. So they all slept, hoping to leave in the morning. Naturally so. You're in the middle of nowhere. Civilization is so far away. Like, should we leave right now? If these stories are true, if they actually saw something, well, they could easily get ambushed out there. Like they don't. It's the 1920s. They don't have the technology we do. Uh, there's no thermal vision or anything like that. They're probably not going to be the ones who are going to be in charge. If a fight were to break out, they'd probably die or get kidnapped or whatever, assuming these were people, or if these were actually the apes that he was talking about. Like, once again, Bigfoot as a term was not as widely spread then. And in fact, good old, what's his name? Fred Beck had some out there hypotheses for what was actually happening here. So we'll get to that later on. But as they were staying there at the cabin, resting at the night, around midnight, they were all awakened as they heard multiple thumps of large rocks pelting their cabin. Now, when this assault failed to make the miners leave, the creatures that they were able to see through these very small holes that were made in there. There weren't, as I understand, there weren't any windows at this place, if I remember the story correctly. Uh, these creatures then attempted to break into the cabin and they jumped on the roof, prompting the men to shoot back to scare them off. And kind of a similar story in the fact that, well, one is Bigfoot, one is, possible aliens. Excuse me. We have like the Hopkinsville Goblins incident in the 50s, which actually not too far away from where I'm at right now in Louisville, Kentucky. Uh, where we had this family who was shooting at these entities that were trying to get inside their house. Uh, Not a one-to-one story, but you kind of see a scenario there. It's like I imagine it so. It's like a siege story. They're inside the house. They're shooting out, trying to get these things, and nothing seems to be working. But they're also not able to break into that house, so they're at a standoff here. But before daybreak, the creatures broke off their assault and the men were able to eventually flee back to civilization when the sun arose. They happened to see one more of the creatures along the way, but it was by itself. So they were able to escape. And they were so frightened by this whole incident that they left $200 worth of equipment and supplies behind. And I'm kicking myself as I say that out loud because I wish I would have done a conversion rate for this like I do for something else later on in this story. $200 in 1920s money is not $200 today. Suffice to say, once again, I don't know the inflation rate. I should have put that in. That's on me. But that shows me that if this story is true, it helps lead credence to it. Because as a miner, you are not more than likely a man of means. You are not someone who can just easily leave those supplies and equipment behind because this is your livelihood. This makes the money. This helps keep a house and a roof over your head even when, giant apes are jumping on top of it. So that leads a lot of credibility to me in that the story is true, potentially. Now, Beck, later on in his life, would write a book, something about, my encounter with the giant ape men of Ape Canyon or something like that, that was co-written by his son. And in it, he speculates that these giant ape-like creatures were actually from another reality, from another dimension, which is something people have thrown out as a possibility of what Bigfoot could possibly be. But he, in his later years, seemed to kind of lose himself a little bit. His mind isn't the best as it was before. And I think kind of his son was messing with him a little, not messing with him, but like telling the story his way, in my opinion, from what I have read of this, to, let his theories be out there, his hypotheses. So there's that. But as far as the story itself is concerned, you are a minor 1920s. You're rough and tumble guy. Like, you don't want anyone talking bad about you. You tell a story like this. He told it to a park ranger. Said, like, hey, you know anything about this? Park ranger didn't. And mysteriously, that story then gets brought to the press, probably that same park ranger who told it. So the men themselves weren't seeking fame originally for this. They had a very bad experience, should this story be true, attempted to flee, got away, told someone they thought was an authority figure, and for their efforts, their story was known by everybody and more than likely ridiculed for it, to the point where Beck had to, in his opinion, write that book so his story could come out, for better or for worse, in this situation. So the fact that someone goes out there and seeks monetary gain for a sighting they've seen does not, to me, necessarily mean it's fake, it's false, it's a hoax. It could be a reason because, hey, there is some money out there to be made with stuff like this. If you can convince people this happened to you and you can make a book deal, you can end up on Oprah, whatever, there's some financial incentive. But I think this book has been out of print for quite some time. Last I looked up, um, and he's been dead for quite some time. Like, it didn't seem like it was a rolling success when he did release it out there. But we're glad it is because that's where we get some of our primary sources for the story. But as far as that, mm, I don't see that as a reason to say, nope, nope, he can't be trusted. We shouldn't listen to anything he says here. So put that on the back burner, and we'll go to our next topic here for one of the major sightings. Once again, not all of the sightings because there are plenty of them out there, but the Momo sightings. Now, what is that? Momo kind of comes from the Missouri side of things. This is in what Loren Coleman, who, by the way, side story. I know I'm all over the place today. I know. uh, I have met Loren Coleman. Let's put it that way. I did not know him that well. I met him at a cryptozoology conference in South Carolina when I was in middle school. Now, I had a huge interest in the cryptozoology, the paranormal, the supernatural, ufology, and stuff like that. But meeting him there, because I had read some of his books before all this, was astonishing. I, to this day, highly respect this man. I think he's someone who doesn't just easily believe in something. I don't think he's someone who's just trying to make a quick buck off of it. I think he's someone who adamantly does as best as possible to do his research to make sure, are these stories true? Can we trust what people say? And if so, let's get their stories out there so people will actually look into these things and just say, well, I don't believe it can happen, therefore it doesn't happen. And he's also a huge reason for why I'm at where I'm at today. Because one of my main focuses was lake monsters. And he said, well, if you want to, and sea serpents, and if you want to do something like that, hey, why not do marine biology? I had never once heard that you could do that as a career. So I went to college with that in mind as that idiot freshman who thought he could double major in marine biology and creative writing because I also loved writing. And that all changed when I failed chemistry because I hate any science that involves math. I love science involving animals and studying them. I could have done that as a career, but the prerequisites for getting into that were too much because they involve science with magic. Not magic, math, science that involved a lot of math, chemistry, physics, blah, blah, blah. So I decided not to do that anymore. But because of that, I ended up meeting Joshua here. Some of you may have heard the story before, and because of that, got connected with him as a friend. Really enjoyed spending time with him, and then came back later on into the fold when he starts the whole church podcast, systematic ecology, and all that, to the point where I'm doing this here today. So if I hadn't met Loren Coleman right here, this recording doesn't happen. There's weird things. And once again, I'm not someone who believes in coincidence. I believe that's the plan of God that happened that way. But you're free to think whatever you think on that. So, side story over. Back to Momo. So, Loren Coleman, which is what prompted that conversation, calls this the largest Bigfoot flap of the 1970s in his book, Bigfoot, The True Story of Apes in America. Here we have the Momo monster sightings that started in 1971 in, it's a real place, I swear, Louisiana, Missouri. That's why I have the map up there. Couldn't find any good Momo stuff, but there we go. But this was truly brought awareness to the sightings in 1972 when we have Terry, who I believe was 8, and Wally, who I think was 5. I think there was a 3-year gap between them. Wally Harrison, who were playing in their yard in the afternoon, only for them to witness a 7-foot-tall, black and hairy figure that stood like a man, but didn't look like one, according to their older sister Doris, who ushered the boys inside and would later report the incident. Around that same time, a farmer's dog had gone missing, only to be seen by an eyewitness dead in Bigfoot's clutches. 3 days later, Edgar Harrison, a local resident, claimed to see fireballs in the sky and later witnessed a darkly colored entity that walked like a man and smelled horrendous. Eventually, as the years went on, the reports would die down, but never truly go away. So those of you not aware, a term that was used there by Loren Coleman is called a flap. A flap is kind of a catch-all term for when there is a lot of activity around a certain area. Like, for instance, Point Pleasant had a huge UFO flap, a huge Mothman flap from 1967 and 1966 to 1967. There's a huge flap of Nessie sightings in 1933. It was probably one of the biggest years for Nessie. And that's when typically a lot of sightings are made, a lot of appearances are made by those creatures. When a lot of people flock to that region to possibly see those entities or UFOs or whatever for themselves. That's a flap. So there have still been reportings to this day in the Louisiana, Missouri area that a Bigfoot is still around. Now, is that true? Is that something that actually happened? There are a lot of people there. Now, compared to other cities, Louisiana, Missouri, as far as I am aware, has made very little off of these sightings. Like, typically, when sightings happen, people will come to the town curious, investigate, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think there's a festival there. And the same, like Point Pleasant has a Mothman festival, or is it Folk or Fook, Arkansas, where, when the Boggy Creek legends happen. As I'm saying that, I forgot to include that with the list. So I'm not going to fly off the handle and just talk about that because I want to get my information right. But those are, 3, and it could have been 4 if I'd been thinking, had my head on straight, of some of the major sightings of Bigfoot and Bigfoot-like entities. So looking here, like, what the heck? If Bigfoot is a thing, what is it? Is it actually some giant ape? Is it some type of American gorilla or something like that? Is it something far beyond what we think it possibly could be? Let's get into that. So, for frame of reference, gorillas in Africa were known to natives of the region for as long as they've been there. But as far as Western naturalists were concerned, the gorilla itself doesn't truly appear until 1900, when it is finally known to scientists. And let me double check that. Yeah, it's around that time. I remember that. So, like, there have been stories before of these giant apes in that area. No one really believed them until it was actually, discovered, studied. That's why, for those of you who've read your Edgar Rice Burroughs, Tarzan was heavily influenced by the actual reports of this giant creature that is close to humans, but not a human, that's so much bigger than us, like stronger than us, that he starts making a story of, Tarzan, Lord of the Apes, and all that. But is there actually, a giant gorilla population in America? I would say no, based off of the descriptions. There have been some offshoot reports of entities like that. I don't want to discount them, but I want to focus on the majority here. That's why, I removed some other stuff that could have maybe enhanced the conversation more, but like for the sake of like keeping things on track as best as possible. There are a lot of outliers out there, and that would definitely be one of them. So I don't think there's a giant, as far as like a gorilla type entity out there. Now, more akin to a taller chimpanzee, we can have a talk. But for everyone else, if you go from a more scientific perspective, as what these could possibly be, there are plenty of people out there who think that this could potentially be, a Gigantopithecus or an Australopithecus. These are, as far as the evolutionary record is concerned, early hominids closely related to men along the way to where we eventually, from the evolutionary record, become who we are. Others would say they're just, a different species that has nothing to do with mankind. It is what it is. There you go. But both of these, as far as appearances go, we're taller, stronger, covered with more hair. You see, more distinctly, more primate, like, even though humans are primates, more as like you would associate more with like an entity, like a primate in your head. Like you think gorilla, you think chimpanzee, or something like that. So, is it possible that something like this could survive for as long as they have and not be discovered? Potentially, yes. That raises a lot of eyebrows, and it should. I mean, if anyone's out there and is like, I don't think Bigfoot's real because a giant, 7 to 15 foot tall ape that has existed all across North America and it's seen by a couple of people and science has not yet documented it, there's a lot of credibility there. You go, I don't know. And I'm one of those people. I'm very skeptical when it comes to that idea. But I also can't just offhand discount what people have seen. And, if this was like 10 people across the recorded history of the Americas that said they'd seen something like this, that'd be a fascinating story. But I couldn't just say out of hand, I could in that scenario say out of hand, yeah, I don't know if I buy it. But there are thousands upon thousands of people, documented cases, strange hairs that have been found, imprints on the ground that plaster casts have been made of, with video footage like the Patterson Gimlin film, and much more that lead me to go, there's something out there. Could it be a Gigantopithecus or an Australopithecus? Potentially. Like, once again, we're never going to know until a body is found. But as skeptics would rightly say, well, if it doesn't exist, we're looking for something that isn't there, so we can't prove that it's not there because it doesn't exist in the first place, which is a rational statement to make. So I guess until we're at the age where we can scan every inch of America, or we actually find a body or something, we're left with that. We're not going to know if this is actually what they are. Me, I lean closer to this one on these possible explanations. There are things I like about some of the other ones down the road that I'll mention in a bit, but there we are. Next up, easy enough, hoaxes. So there have been recorded hoaxes of people finding Bigfoot and trying to sell the body or make money off of it by charging people to see it. These things happen. It's been done all across the United States, all across the world. not with just hominids, but also, you got your jackalopes and hodags and stuff like that, which more than likely those are all hoaxes. Now, when it comes to Bigfoot himself, there have been some people. You got the Minnesota Iceman, who some people claim was this, shall we say, it would be. It would be pretty much like this. Encased in ice is found somewhere in a glacier somewhere like that. The Ivan Sanderson, a renowned cryptozoologist, went to go track it down, but eventually the body got lost along the way. So that's one of those classic cases. It's like, well, of course it did. Like the skeptic would say, well, now no one can actually confirm whether it is what they said it was. Which, to their credit, I agree. I really wish the body was still there so we could say for sure this is real, this is not real. But as far as we go back to the Patterson Gimlin film, there's a reason I brought that image back up there. In 1967, this happens. Patterson and Gimlin both were not the wealthiest people at this point in time. They were struggling to get the funding needed for the documentary that they were shooting at that time. Now, I present to you, if anyone's a big James Bond fan, Diamonds Are Forever came out in 1971. In that movie, there's a scene where it's very racially insensitive, by the way. It's also 1971, where in the circus they have there's a black woman there who seems to transform there's circus theatrics into a giant gorilla. It's a guy in a gorilla suit. Now, I wish I'd have put the image here. I completely forgot to do that. If you look at that gorilla in the movie, with Hollywood funding behind it on something like James Bond that made money, so they would put a budget behind it, compared to the Patterson Gimlin film, one looks cheap, the other looks like it could possibly be something that actually exists in nature. The one that possibly looks like it exists in nature is the Patterson Gimlin film. The other that looks like it came from a low budget student film is the one from the movie that had a budget of, at that time, $7.2 million, which adjusted for inflation would be about $54,532,622 million today. So is it impossible for Gimlin and Patterson to have hired someone to make a suit? No, it's not impossible. I find it improbable with the funds they had at the time, with the technology we had at the time, with the seamstresses that would have to work on this suit to make it look as authentic as possible. I find it very unbelievable that right there is a fake. Once again, not impossible that it's a fake, but improbable. And Patterson would die, I think, in 72 of some form of cancer, and went to his grave saying, "This happened." And Gimlin at worst said, maybe it's possible he hoodwinked me, but I don't think it. I think that thing was real. And to go to your grave like that, like, sure, you could argue there are people who are prideful enough to keep the lie, but like, that's your moment, man. Like, to be honest about what happened. And like I said, it's possible someone could take that and just maintain the lie. But for him, I think he was legitimate. I think, as far as he is aware, that actually happened. So maybe he was hoodwinked. Maybe he and Gimlin both. Maybe one was pranking the other. Or maybe there's something out there. Now, that's hoaxes. We move on from there to the more fantastical in the extraterrestrial. Now, I'm sure some of us have seen these kind of bumper stickers like that around. This is not an unpopular theory, hypothesis for what Bigfoot could actually be. I don't buy it particularly, but there is a lot there. Like, one of the reasons I did include that report of fireballs and the Momo sightings is that there are plenty of people who do. Sometimes there are flaps of UFOs and there are flaps of Bigfoot sightings in the same area. Now, whether that's just like a high strangeness kind of thing, and they're kind of attracted to a certain scenario with a universal lining or whatever, or if Bigfoots are actually some intelligent race that roams the stars and has their own technology and chooses not to wear clothes. I mean, who knows? Or maybe that's their example of a environmental suit. More than likely not. But there have been several reports, of a Bigfoot being sighted in the area, someone following it, and there being a UFO on the ground, and then taking them inside of it and then lifting off. Once again, those are more outliers compared to most sightings, but it's something that has happened several times over, so I can't ignore it. Now, once again, I don't think Bigfoot is an extraterrestrial, but I would be doing you all a disservice to say because I don't think it, therefore you don't have to think about it either. So I want to bring it up as a possibility, as something that could potentially be true. Next up on our list, Bigfoot is an ultra terrestrial. That's something that will tie into our next discussion as well. And I've already brought up that subject earlier for next month. For those of you not in the know, an ultra terrestrial is a being the term was coined by John Keel, he of the Mothman prophecies and so on and so forth. Actually, in another book of his that was written after that, or maybe it was before that. Mothman prophecies 73. I think this came out in the 70s. Yeah, in 1970. Anyways, the idea being is that an idea of what aliens could be, what UFOs could be, is that they're not from another planet. They may be from an entirely new reality, phasing through our dimension a little differently. And that's why they act so weird. That's why, they don't understand our customs or anything like that. When you get into kookier stuff like Indrid Cold and stuff like that, it's like fascinating. And the way the Men in Black kind of work as well. If they're not government agents, are they working for these other people who slip between realities? As far as things go for Bigfoot, some people have reported seeing, portals emerge from somewhere and Bigfoot slipping through them. Or, like I said earlier, some people believe he has a cloaking ability or something like that. Once again, those are more outliers. But for the sake of this, I'm bringing them up as something that, okay, just because this is how animals and sapient beings work in our reality compared to their reality. If there was such a thing, if they were out there, could that be a thing? Is it possible that somewhere out there in the multiverse, assuming a multiverse exists, there's a creature that can walk through portals like that and end up in our world for a little bit, hang around, throw some rocks at a cabin, and then move on to the next one? Sure. I'm not willing to take a bullet for that one. I'm barely willing to take a bullet for it being some unidentified ape species. But it is a possibility. And like as much as I love the extraterrestrial one, being, a Johnny Quest fan as I am, and that being one of the explanations for what Bigfoot actually is, um, I don't buy that one. Ultra terrestrial, I can get a little more on board with that one, but it does suffer from that problem of you bringing up a fantastical idea to explain a fantastical thing. That doesn't inherently mean it's wrong. It means that in order to explain something that we don't understand, you had to create something else to explain that thing we don't understand. But that shouldn't inherently disregard and say, well, because we had to do that, it's not real. But you're having to put in extra work to get there. And that's where my skepticism, you just kind of start going off. My skepticism senses are tingling. But that's that. What do you guys think, dear listeners and viewers? Is Bigfoot real, a hoax, an extraterrestrial, or something else? We didn't touch everything the wilds of America has to offer tonight, so let us know in the comments below if there's something you'd like us to do as a follow-up. Next time, also voted by you, the listener and viewer, in February, we'll be moving on to our next category, the paranormal, where we'll be discussing the astounding and mesmerizing eyewitness accounts of the mysterious Mothman. I am so looking forward to that one. I should be having a guest on for it. We shall see. Until next time, everyone. See you.